Hey everyone! Welcome to The Young and the Restless. I'm Jane, and I'm so excited to have you here. If you love Young and the Restless, then you're in the right place. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a video. Alright, let's dive right in. According to spoilers for The Young and the Restless, Sharon Newman may realize Carter is the killer. Will Sharon's scheme to clear Nick Newman end up in grave danger? With Damian Kane's death, YNR sparked a murder investigation, and Chance Chancellor is working hard to find out who the killer is. Of course, the program is playing with the idea that Kane Ashby was the intended target instead, but there's a decent probability the dagger thrower wanted Damian out of the picture. Because none of the regular significant actors would stoop to knife tossing to get rid of someone, Carter is the likely suspect. Carter is the one wild card in all of this, and he's capable of anything because he's so dedicated to Kane. Carter was likely attempting to remove a relationship hurdle for Kane, who has expressed a wish to reunite with Lily Winters. Carter may be framing Nick, who discovered the bloody dagger in the washroom of his sleeping car on July 16th. This could be Carter's ploy to shift suspicion away from the Newmans while also throwing them off their game. Carter may believe that this will help Kane achieve his other ambitions back in Genoa City. Chance is already digging into things, but he won't be the only one hunting for answers in the following episodes. Sharon will also take control of the situation, most likely hoping to clear Nick's name. Sharon appears to be playing detective and doing everything she can to help Nick get out of this situation. The closer Sharon gets to the truth, the more danger she may face. If Sharon discovers Carter is to blame, he may seek to target her again. Carter may decide that he can't have Sharon destroying all of his plans, so he'll go for her and risk her life. Perhaps that will offer Nick the opportunity to play the hero for Sharon in the end. Nick may save the day just as Sharon appears to be doomed. Regardless, The Young and the Restless spoilers suggest Carter has more tricks up his sleeve, so we'll keep you updated on all the wild news and clues that emerge. Sharon's pulse beat in her chest as she examined the evidence scattered across her desk, photographs, bank statements, and a series of cryptic messages that all pointed to the same horrific conclusion: Carter was the murderer. The truth hit her like a physical blow, causing her breath to catch in her mouth as she replayed every encounter and seemingly innocent comment he had made in the previous several weeks. How did she miss it? Carter had been there under her nose the entire time, playing the role of the concerned friend while secretly plotting deception and murder. The pieces fell into place with alarming clarity: his sudden interest in Nick's location, his insistence on assisting with the investigation, and even the way he had quietly directed suspicion onto others. Sharon had stepped right into a well-planned act, unaware until now. But the most terrifying notion of all was that Nick, the guy she had been striving to save, was still in severe danger, and Carter's plan was far from complete. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone, her mind racing from the gravity of the situation. She needed to warn Nick before it was too late, but how? Carter was always around, watching and listening. If he suspected she was telling the truth, she would be his next target. The weight of the secret crushed against her, a stifling burden that threatened to paralyze her with fear. She couldn't trust anyone, not the cops, her co-workers, or even her closest friends. Carter had invaded every part of her life, and now she had to outwit him without tipping him off. The stakes have never been higher. If she failed, Nick would be held accountable for crimes he did not commit, while Carter would walk free, leaving a trail of bodies in his wake. Sharon's mind raced as she planned her next step. She needed proof, unquestionable evidence that would finally expose Carter. The documents in front of her were incriminating, but not sufficient. She needed something substantial, anything that could stand up in court and undermine Carter's carefully manufactured alibis. Her gaze shifted to the clock on the wall. Time was running out. Nick's trial was only a few days away, and if she didn't act quickly, he would be guilty of the atrocities Carter committed. The injustice of it consumed her, fueling a frantic drive. She couldn't let that happen. She would not. Sharon steeled herself and began to devise a strategy. If Carter was the murderer, he must have left a trail somewhere, a mistake or slip-up that would lead her to the truth. She needed to follow his steps, investigate his past, and discover the missing connection that connected him to the murders. However, this required her to come dangerously near to him, putting her own safety at risk. The thought sent shivers down her spine, but she ignored the fear. Nick's life was on the line, and she would not let him down. As she grabbed her belongings, her phone buzzed and an unfamiliar number appeared on the screen. Her pulse quickened as she hesitated to respond, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hello?" The voice on the other line sounded distorted and artificial, sending shivers through her. "Sharon, stop digging. You have no idea what you're playing with." Before she could react, the line went silent, leaving her transfixed in place. Carter was aware. He knew she was on to him. The warning was a clear threat, a guarantee of violence if she persisted. But rather than deterring her, it strengthened her drive. If Carter was terrified enough to threaten her, she was closer to the truth than she knew. The next few hours flew by as Sharon worked tirelessly, pursuing every clue, no matter how tiny. She hacked Carter's financial records and discovered a sequence of dubious activities, including enormous sums of money transferred into offshore accounts and payments to shady persons with criminal affiliations. Then there were the emails, painstakingly deleted but not quite wiped, in which Carter described cleaning up loose ends and finishing what he started. The more she discovered, the more hideous Carter's actual character became. This wasn't only about framing Nick, it was about a much larger scheme than she could have anticipated. However, with each piece of evidence she discovered, the danger around her increased. Shadows appeared to move on their own, and the sound of footsteps followed her as she walked alone at night. She turned a corner and caught a sight of Carter eyeing her from afar, his countenance opaque but his presence undeniably ominous. She realized she was running out of time. Carter would not wait for her to reveal him, he would strike first, destroying her before she could jeopardize his plans. The breaking point came when she uncovered a hidden safe in Carter's apartment, the contents of which revealed the final, terrifying piece of the puzzle. Inside were images of all of Nick's victims, each labeled with a date and time, as well as a meticulous plan for his collapse. But what made her sick was the last photo, a photograph of herself marked in red with a single word scrawled beneath it, "Next." Carter had already decided her fate. Terror and outrage raged within her as she grasped the full scope of Carter's savagery. She had to act now. She gathered every scrap of evidence and prepared to present it to the authorities, but as she reached for the door, it swung open, revealing Carter, his normal attractive smile replaced with a cold, calculating glare. "Are you going somewhere, Sharon?" he inquired, his tone deceptively calm. Her blood grew cold as she realized she had gone straight into his trap. If she didn't make it out alive, the evidence she had would be meaningless. The confrontation that ensued was a flurry of adrenaline and desperation. Sharon struggled with all she had, employing every tactic she knew to keep Carter at bay. However, he was far stronger, faster, and more dangerous than she had anticipated. Just when she felt her strength slipping, a disturbance in the corridor distracted him for a few seconds, giving her the opportunity she needed. With a burst of desperate energy, she hit, throwing him off balance and sprinting for the door. The dash to safety was a nightmare, with each second stretching into forever as she ran, Carter's outraged screams booming behind her. She didn't stop running until she reached the police station, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she handed the evidence to the nearest detective. "Carter's the killer," she choked out. "He's coming for Nick, and for me." The hours that followed were a blur of interrogations, arrests, and desperate attempts to find Nick before Carter could quiet him permanently. In the end, Sharon's unwavering persistence saved him. Carter was captured just as he was ready to make his final move, his plan collapsing under the weight of the evidence against him. Nick was exonerated and his reputation cleansed, but the cost was almost excruciating. As the dust settled, Sharon sat alone in her apartment, the weight of all that had happened bearing down on her. She discovered the truth, but at what cost? The terror, the treachery, and the continual look over her shoulder had transformed her. Carter's depravity had left long-lasting scars. But, despite the gloom, there was one unmistakable truth: she had survived. And as long as she lived, she would not stop fighting for justice. The threat had passed, but the combat had left its imprint. Sharon would never be the same afterwards. That night, the wind howled outside, and everything inside me felt as chaotic. I should have realized something was amiss when Sharon's voice trembled over the phone and asked me to meet her alone at the edge of Chancellor Park. She never sounded terrified like that, not Sharon, the woman who had survived more than her fair share of sorrow and always come out stronger. But this was not strength. This was desperation. I dashed out of the house, barely remembering to grab my keys, my heart thumping against my ribs like a warning bell that I couldn't ignore. Nick had been in jail for 3 days, and every second was slowly killing Sharon. The murder of Jeremy Fisk had sent shockwaves through Genoa City, not because he was beloved, far from it, but because Nick had been discovered unconscious in his train compartment, with the murder weapon lying beneath the bench. Blood is on the handle. Jeremy's blood. There is no trace of forced entry. There is no one else on camera near the area. But Sharon didn't believe it. Not for a single second. And I didn't either. Sharon loved someone with all of her heart, and she loved Nick enough to risk everything, including her own safety, to find out the truth. I got at the park just in time to see her emerge from the darkness, holding a folder to her bosom as if it contained the secrets of the universe. Her eyes were wide and furious. "He did it," she explained, her voice cracking. "This is Carter. He's the one who killed Jeremy." At first, I couldn't believe it. Carter? The soft-spoken security advisor Newman hired a few months back? Who was the man who seemed to blend in, always had answers, and appeared helpful? But as Sharon unloaded what she discovered, the pieces started to fit together like a terrible puzzle. She had discovered encrypted emails from a burner phone Carter had left unattended at Crimson Lights. She discovered surveillance footage that had been strangely deleted, with the exception of a backup copy he had not mentioned. And the last nail? Jeremy Fisk had been blackmailing someone at Newman Enterprises, and Carter was the only one with the motivation, means, and, thanks to Sharon's investigation, opportunity. The setup was careful. Carter was aware of Nick's previous temper outbursts, his desire to play the hero, and, most importantly, his love for Sharon. He'd placed the weapon, knocked Nick out with a sedative laced into a drink of scotch he'd left in the car, and waited until he was unconscious before meticulously setting the scene. But why? What did Carter gain? Sharon didn't know yet, but she had a strategy that, if executed correctly, would clear Nick. She'd already left a note for Chancellor and planned to contact Carter under the premise of providing information about another suspect. She needed someone to film the confession and stay concealed while she lured him into confessing. Against my better judgment, I decided to help. Perhaps it was loyalty to Nick. Perhaps there was admiration for Sharon's bravery. Perhaps it was the simple injustice of seeing another innocent Newman accept the blame for someone else's sins. We met Carter that night in the Newman warehouse off Old Mill Road, a location far enough away to avoid suspicion. Sharon wore a wire, while I hid in the shadows with a long-lens camera, attempting to keep my hands from shaking. Carter appeared, calm as ever, clothed in a black coat and gloves, as if he knew exactly how things were going to finish. At first, he pretended innocence, perplexed by Sharon's charges. But when she persisted and laid out the proof, his expression began to alter. The friendly advisor was no longer present. Instead, someone cold took his place. Calculated. He smiled. "You're smarter than I thought," he admitted. "But not smart enough. Then everything went wrong. Before I could respond, he charged at her. Sharon screamed as Carter yanked the wire from her collar and threw it into the mud. She fought back, kicking and clawing, but he was more powerful. I dropped the camera and ran, my heart in my throat, each second feeling like it lasted forever. When I arrived, Carter had drawn a knife and was pulling Sharon towards the back of the warehouse. I tackled him from behind, and we both fell hard. Sharon got to her feet and grabbed a nearby pipe, ramming it into Carter's back just as he lunged for the knife again. He fell and groaned. Blood pooled beneath him. For a brief moment, everything was still. Then the sirens started. Thank God, Chance had arrived. He and 2 officers stormed in, rifles drawn, and Sharon dropped the pipe, shaking her hands. The officers handcuffed Carter, who was still screaming under his breath about how they always choose Nick and nobody ever sees the quiet ones. His voice was chilling, filled with hate rather than regret. That's when we realized that this wasn't just about Jeremy or blackmail. It was about vengeance. Carter had applied to work for the Newmans 5 years prior and had been turned down. He'd lost everything after that, plunging into disaster, blaming Victor, Nick, and everyone. It was his masterwork. Nick was discharged the following morning. He burst into tears as soon as he spotted Sharon. Not the Nick we all know, the strong, composed protector, but the raw, broken guy who feared he would never see the woman he loved again. He embraced her as if he never wanted to let go, and I stood there, watching as they clung to each other, realizing that even when the truth is revealed, the devastation may still be severe. Sharon had bruises on her wrists, a gash on her cheek, and eyes full of tears that she refused to shed. Nick continued whispering I'm sorry, despite the fact that he had nothing to apologize for. In that moment, I discovered something else. Sharon didn't simply save Nick, she also saved herself. She fought a monster alone, equipped only with her courage and unwavering trust in the truth. For weeks, Genoa City would discuss the case, about Carter, the Newman scandal, and how close Nick came to losing everything. Few people understand how much it cost Sharon to walk through that fire. She came to Crimson Lights the next day, bandaged but upright, and poured coffee as if nothing had occurred. But every time the bell above the door sounded, I noticed her flinch. She tensed whenever someone gazed at her for an extended period of time. Trauma is not something you can recover from overnight. But that's Sharon, she suffers her sorrow in silence and conceals her worries beneath kindness. Yet I know that in her quietest moments, she replays everything. The encounter. The threat. The knife. The realization that the man she had smiled at across the coffee counter wanted her dead. Carter was denied bail. His hearing is scheduled for next month, and the DA is pressing for the maximum penalty. Nick has returned home, spending more time with Faith and working with Victoria to repair his public image, but you can tell it affected him. Not only was he arrested, but he also realized how close he was to losing Sharon and how little control he had to prevent it. For a man like Nick, helplessness is the most serious hurt of all. But if anything good came out of this horror, it was Sharon and Nick finding their way back together. They've grown closer now, united by something dark and frightening but unbreakable. Sometimes it takes almost losing everything to learn what is truly important. And maybe that's what Sharon would tell you if she were to talk about that night. Perhaps she would argue that love is more than just holding someone close, it is about fighting for them even when the entire world is against you. Perhaps she would respond that truth does not always arrive easily, and justice frequently takes a twisted path. But, in the end, standing in that warehouse with blood on her hands and dread in her eyes, she refused to back down. She discovered the murderer. She saved Nick. And, while the plan almost ended in disaster, it also ended in something far more powerful, vindication and a quiet, hard-earned serenity.